My wife wanted a divorce without knowing. I just inherited $2 million, she said. Only he could speak to me. My wife said she needed a divorce, but she didn't know one thing. I had just inherited $2 million. What happens next is a story of betrayal, deception, and unexpected consequences you won't believe. Why would she take such a drastic step? And how did it all backfire? Stay tuned to find out. It had been one of those relentless days that made you feel like a machine. I'd been up before dawn, dragging myself out of bed while the world still slept, pouring cup after cup of coffee just to keep my eyes open. The office was a blur of deadlines and meetings that never seemed to end. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, all I could think about was finally getting home, collapsing onto the couch, and letting the day fade away. The thought of stepping into my living room, kicking off my shoes, and sinking into the worn cushions felt like salvation. I was already imagining the quiet hum of the fridge in the background, the distant murmur of the TV, and the comforting stillness of home. Traffic crawled, as it always did. Tail lights blinked in a sea of red, and the familiar frustration of rush hour gnawed at me. But even that couldn't dampen the relief of knowing I was almost there, just a few more blocks, and I'd be back in my space. I turned down our street, the same line of modest suburban houses I'd driven past 1,000 times before. My mind wandered to dinner, maybe a quick drink to unwind. But more than that, I was looking forward to a moment of peace. Lately, things had been tense at home, not explosive, not hostile, just off. Olivia and I had been like two ships passing in the night. She worked late, I worked later. We barely saw each other anymore, and when we did, it felt like small talk to fill the silence rather than the easy laughter we used to share. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a second, the car idling. It wasn't like I was avoiding going inside. I just needed a moment to catch my breath, to shift gears from the chaos of the office to the quiet I hoped I'd find inside. The house was dark except for a faint glow in the living room window. Olivia must be home, I thought. Maybe tonight we could finally sit down, have a real conversation, find a way back to what we used to be. I killed the engine, grabbed my briefcase, and headed to the door. The smell of her perfume hit me the second I stepped inside. It lingered in the air like a memory, faint but unmistakable. The house was quiet, too quiet. I called out her name, but there was no answer. My mind didn't go to anything dramatic. I figured she was upstairs or on the phone, caught up in something. I set my briefcase down by the door and walked into the living room. The glow came from the TV, muted and playing a channel neither of us usually watched. Her phone was on the coffee table, a half-empty glass of wine beside it. My chest tightened just a bit, that subtle gut feeling that something was off but not enough to sound the alarm. I reached for the remote to turn the TV off, then thought better of it. Maybe she just stepped out for a second and would be right back. I tried to shake the unease creeping in. I headed to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and grabbed a beer. The hiss of the cap, breaking free, and the cold weight of the bottle in my hand, should have been comforting. But my nerves were still on edge. I took a long sip and leaned against the counter, staring out the window into the backyard. The moonlight painted the patio in pale silver, the faint outlines of the chairs and table almost ghostly in the stillness. It was the kind of quiet that made you think too much, remember too much. I thought about the times Olivia and I would sit out there late into the night, talking about everything and nothing. The nights we laughed until our sides hurt, the mornings we spent wrapped up in each other. Lately, those moments felt like they belonged to another life, one I could barely recognize. I heard the faint buzz of my phone from the living room and walked back to grab it, hoping it was Olivia. Maybe she was calling to explain, to say she'd just run out for something, that she'd be home soon. But the screen only showed an unknown number. My stomach dropped. I wasn't the type to jump to worst-case scenarios, but tonight had a strange energy to it. I answered, my voice steady but quieter than usual. "Hello? Leo," a voice I recognized immediately said, distant and mechanical, like it had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. It was Olivia. But the way she said my name made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't warm. It wasn't familiar. It was like a stranger was using her voice, reading lines off a script. "I think it's time we end this. I want a divorce." Everything stopped. The world froze. My mind refused to register the words. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, my hand gripping the arm of the couch for balance. What? Was all I could manage to get out. My own voice sounded far away, hollow. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. It's over, Leo. I can't do this anymore, she said, her tone flat, unfeeling. She might as well have been telling me the weather forecast. You can contact my lawyer if you have any questions. And then she hung up. Just like that. I stared at the phone in my hand as if it could explain what had just happened. The house around me felt different, like it belonged to someone else. The photos on the wall, the furniture we picked out together, the life we built. It all felt foreign. Divorce. The word echoed in my head, a heavy, jagged weight I couldn't swallow. I sat down, the beer forgotten on the coffee table. My mind raced, trying to piece together what had just happened. This wasn't some argument that got out of hand. This was deliberate, planned. She didn't stumble over her words. She didn't leave room for doubt or discussion. She had already made up her mind. And she didn't even have the decency to tell me in person. She just called, dropped the bomb, and walked away. My hands were shaking now. Not from anger, at least not yet, but from pure, unfiltered disbelief. How had it come to this? I thought we'd been drifting apart, sure, but not falling apart. I thought it was just a rough patch, something we'd get through. But apparently, I was the only one still holding on. The only one who believed in for better or worse. She had already decided, long before that phone call. This wasn't a conversation. It was an announcement, and I was just the last to know. I tried to think of what to do next. Call her back. Demand an explanation. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wouldn't change anything. She'd already made her move. I had been blindsided, completely caught off guard. And now I was left standing in the ruins of what I thought was a marriage, trying to figure out how I'd missed all the signs. I sat in the silence of the living room, staring at the empty wine glass Olivia had left on the coffee table. My mind was a mess, bouncing from one thought to another, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Divorce. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't the kind of thing you just tossed out over the phone. I kept replaying her words in my head, searching for some hidden meaning or a clue that might help me understand. What had I missed? Hadn't we built this life together? I thought we were a team, even when things got tough. But now, it felt like I was the only one who hadn't seen this coming. The past few months had been tense, sure. She'd been more distant, spending late nights out or buried in her phone. But I chalked it up to work or stress. We all go through rough patches, I told myself. I thought we'd find our way back to each other, like we always had before. Olivia was the kind of person who, when she decided to do something, you didn't question it. She had that quiet determination, that way of making you believe everything would work out because she had it under control. I guess I let myself believe that too. But now I was questioning everything. Was she really at work late all those nights? Was it just stress, or was there something else I'd missed? Something bigger? I tried calling her back, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message calm, rational, asking her to explain. I didn't want to fight, I just wanted to understand. But the minutes stretched into hours, and she never called back. I sat there, staring at my phone, half expecting it to buzz at any moment with a text or a call that never came. The silence was maddening. Every creak of the house, every faint sound outside, made my heart jump. I kept looking at the front door, hoping she might walk in and tell me this was all some mistake. That she hadn't meant it, that we could work things out. But the door stayed closed. By the next morning, I was running on maybe 2 hours of sleep and too much coffee. My mind was still racing, and the more I thought about it, the more questions I had. If she wanted a divorce, why hadn't she said anything sooner? Why hadn't she given me a chance to fix whatever was wrong? And why now, out of the blue? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling me, something more than just a failing relationship. It didn't make sense. We'd built a life together, shared everything. Or at least I thought we had. Now, I wasn't so sure. As the day wore on, I started looking back on the past year, trying to piece it all together. There were moments I'd brushed off at the time, like the way she'd started keeping her phone screen turned away from me, or how she'd suddenly needed to open her own bank account just in case. I hadn't thought much of it then. People need their space, right? I trusted her. I never imagined I had any reason not to. But now those moments stood out like neon signs. Was she planning this all along? How long had she been pulling away, making her own plans, without me even noticing? The realization made my stomach turn. I'd been so focused on work, on deadlines, on trying to make a better life for both of us, that I'd completely missed the warning signs. I decided to do something I'd never done before: look through our finances. I'd always left that stuff to her. She was better at it, more organized. She'd handled the bills, the credit cards, everything. I trusted her with that, just like I trusted her with everything else. But now I needed answers. I pulled out the file drawer in the office and started sifting through statements, receipts, anything I could find. At first, it looked normal. The usual monthly expenses, mortgage payments, utilities. But then I noticed something odd. A payment I didn't recognize, made to a name I didn't know. It was for a significant amount, enough to make me pause. I pulled the statement closer, studying it. It wasn't a store or a utility company. It was something private, something that didn't make sense. The more I looked, the more confused I got. What was this payment for, and why hadn't I known about it? I kept digging. There were more transactions, all in the same range, all going to the same place. It didn't add up. My gut told me something was off, something big. I needed to know what it was. I sat back in the chair, staring at the papers spread out on the desk, my heart pounding. What was Olivia doing? Was this why she wanted a divorce? Had she been hiding something from me? My thoughts spiraled, each one worse than the last. I felt the walls closing in, the weight of everything pressing down on my chest. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was right there. She'd been keeping secrets, and I was just starting to uncover them. I tried calling her again, and again it went to voicemail. I sent her a message, asking her to come home, to talk, to explain. But there was no response. The silence was deafening, and it was driving me mad. I needed to know the truth. I couldn't just sit there, waiting for answers that might never come. I had to confront her. I had to find out what was going on, no matter how much it hurt. Because the not knowing, the uncertainty, that was the worst part. It gnawed at me, kept me up at night, made me question everything I thought I knew about her, about us. By the time the sun started to set again, I felt like I was losing my grip. My world had been turned upside down, and I didn't even know why. The Olivia I thought I knew, the woman I had built a life with, was gone. Or maybe she'd never been who I thought she was. I couldn't tell anymore. All I knew was that I needed answers, and I needed them soon. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in limbo, drowning in questions and doubts. I needed to face her, to look her in the eye and demand the truth. Because if she wasn't going to tell me what was going on, I'd find out on my own. I wasn't going to let her walk away without giving me the answers I deserved. And that's when I realized she wasn't just leaving. She had been planning this for months. But the big question is, did I see it coming in time? Or was it already too late to stop her? Comment below, press 1 if you think I managed to turn the tables. Press 2 if you think she walked away with everything. Let's see what you think happens next. I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was just around the corner. The longer I sat with it, the clearer it became. Olivia wasn't just walking away from our marriage. She was running towards something else. That thought gnawed at me constantly, keeping me awake when I should have been passed out from sheer exhaustion. I started digging deeper, combing through every detail of our life together, trying to find the thread that unraveled the whole story. It wasn't just about the phone call, or the silence that followed. It was about all the little things that hadn't added up before, the puzzle pieces I'd never thought to put together until now. As the hours turned into days, a picture started to form, one that made my stomach churn and my head spin. Olivia had been planning this for a long time, longer than I could have ever guessed. I kept replaying those conversations from months ago. The offhand comments she'd made that didn't seem important at the time. Like that weekend trip she'd taken with friends that she wouldn't elaborate on. Or the time she insisted we move some savings into her name, just in case of an emergency. Back then, I didn't think twice about it. I trusted her. She was my wife, the woman I'd built my life with. But now, every little detail felt like a clue, a breadcrumb trail that led straight to the truth. I started going through our bank records more carefully, sifting through transactions I'd never really looked at before. Most of it was normal grocery bills, utilities, the mortgage payments. But then I saw it, A transfer I didn't recognize. A name that meant nothing to me. It wasn't the amount that caught my attention, it was the timing. It had happened right around the time she started talking about needing space. Right before she opened her own account. My pulse quickened as I stared at the screen. I clicked through to see more details, hoping it was just a mistake, something I'd overlooked. But there it was again, the same name, another payment. It wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She'd been moving money without telling me, and not just once or twice. I felt my hands tighten into fists. My jaw clench as a wave of anger rushed over me. How long had she been doing this? And more importantly, why? What was she using the money for? The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. This wasn't just about a failing marriage or a rough patch. This was calculated. She'd been planning her exit for months, maybe longer. And I'd been blind to it. I felt like a fool, like I'd been living in some kind of fantasy while she was setting up her escape route. It wasn't just the money that made my blood run cold. It was the thought of how easily she'd done it. How she'd smiled at me across the dinner table, kissed me goodnight, and acted like everything was fine while she was quietly pulling away. I couldn't wrap my head around it. How could someone you loved, someone you trusted more than anyone in the world, look you in the eye and lie to you? I wanted to scream, to smash something, to make her understand how much she'd hurt me. But I couldn't do that. I needed to keep my head clear, to stay calm. If she was planning something, then I needed to be smart. I needed to find out exactly what was going on before I confronted her. Because if I was right, if she was hiding something bigger, I couldn't risk tipping her off. I couldn't give her the chance to cover her tracks. I started going through old emails, texts, anything that might give me a clue. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I'd know it when I saw it. I opened a folder labeled Household, one I hadn't touched in years. Most of it was boring stuff: home improvement receipts, warranties for appliances, that kind of thing. But then I found a printout of an email from Olivia's old job. It was a reminder about her life insurance policy, something I vaguely remembered her mentioning years ago. The amount listed was higher than I expected, way higher than I'd remembered. A chill ran down my spine. Why had she printed this out? And why had she kept it buried here, away from all the other financial documents we usually kept together? I sat there, holding the paper, feeling like I was on the edge of a cliff. Every instinct I had was screaming that there was more to this story. Olivia hadn't just decided to leave me. She'd been planning it, calculating every move, and I'd been too blind to see it. My mind raced as I tried to piece it all together. The private account, the hidden transactions, the sudden distance, it all pointed to something bigger. Something I wasn't ready to face, but I had to. If I didn't dig deeper, if I didn't find out the truth, I'd never be able to move forward. I couldn't just let her walk away without understanding why. I had to know the whole story, no matter how much it hurt. I had to find the answers, even if they shattered everything I thought I knew. After discovering those unexplained transactions, I knew I had to go deeper. It wasn't just about money, it was about figuring out what Olivia had been doing behind my back. The thought of her setting up some kind of secret fund was bad enough, but the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. What would she need all that money for? And why keep it hidden from me, her husband? I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was going on. I started pulling every statement I could find, going back months, even years, hunting for patterns. My desk was buried under piles of paper bank records, credit card statements, utility bills, anything that might show me where she was sending that money and why. As I flipped through the pages, my heart raced. The more I uncovered, the more it felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. That's when I found something that stopped me cold. A payment to a private investigator. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Why would Olivia hire someone to investigate anything? We weren't dealing with lawsuits or legal trouble. We were just a regular couple, at least I'd thought so. But there it was, as clear as day, a substantial payment, not once but twice, to a name I didn't recognize. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stared at the charges. This wasn't just a random transaction, this was deliberate, calculated. And it was personal. Olivia had been snooping into something, and my gut told me it had to do with me. What was she looking for? Why go behind my back and hire a private investigator? I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were starting to fit together in a way that made my stomach turn. She must have been searching for leverage, some kind of dirt she could use to justify what she was about to do. Divorce wasn't just a breakup, it was a war. And if she had any reason to make me look like the bad guy, she'd come out on top. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Olivia hadn't just been planning to leave me. She'd been preparing for a fight. I felt my hands shaking as I picked up the phone and dialed the number listed next to the charges. The line rang twice before a calm, professional voice answered. I gave a fake name, pretended I was looking for investigative services, just to confirm who I was dealing with. Sure enough, it was a private investigator's office. My stomach churned as I thanked them and hung up. The charges were real. Olivia had hired someone to dig into my life. But what had they found? Had she uncovered something she thought she could use against me? Or was it something worse, something I couldn't even imagine? I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. I'd never been unfaithful. I'd never lied about money or kept secrets from her. Hell, I'd barely had time to think about anything outside of work and home. So what was she looking for? And why didn't she just talk to me? My thoughts spiraled as I tried to piece together her motive. Maybe she thought I was hiding money, stashing away assets from myself. Or maybe she was trying to prove that I wasn't the man I claimed to be. Either way, the fact that she'd gone this far spending our money on a private investigator made it clear she wasn't planning on an amicable split. She was preparing for a battle, and I was the last to know. I couldn't let her keep the upper hand. If she was digging into my life, I needed to know exactly what she'd found. But how do you fight back when you don't even know what you're up against? I grabbed my laptop and started searching for the investigator's name, hoping I could find anything that would give me a clue. It didn't take long to pull up their website. They specialized in uncovering hidden truths, their homepage boasted. A pit formed in my stomach as I scrolled through their services. Spousal investigations, asset searches, background checks. They were the kind of people you hired when you wanted to find something, no matter how small. If Olivia had hired them, it meant she was serious. This wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment decision. She'd been planning this for a while, long enough to hire professionals and gather evidence. I clicked through their blog, looking for cases they'd handled in the past. Most of it was vague, but it painted a clear picture. These people didn't mess around. They found what you were looking for, and they didn't leave anything to chance. I felt my chest tighten. If they had been digging into my life, they'd have gone through everything: my financial records, my work history, maybe even my personal communications. The thought made me sick. I couldn't believe we'd reached this point, where my wife, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, was using strangers to pry into my world, to try and find something she could use against me. I spent the rest of the day locked in my office, surrounded by papers and glowing screens, trying to figure out my next move. I didn't want to panic, but the anger was bubbling just under the surface. I kept thinking about how she must have felt, sitting across from that investigator, handing over our money so they could dig into me. Did she feel justified? Did she feel guilty? Did she even care? I needed to confront her. But I knew I couldn't go in unprepared. If she'd hired someone to find dirt on me, I had to be ready for whatever she thought she knew. More than that, I had to be ready to fight back. I couldn't let her turn this into a one-sided attack. If she was going to play dirty, I had no choice but to protect myself. The trust I'd placed in her, the life we'd built together, it was all unraveling, and I had no idea how far she was willing to go. The investigator's report wasn't included in the charges, but I knew it had to exist. Somewhere out there, a file with my name on it held the answers I needed. If I could get my hands on it, I'd know exactly what she'd found, and I could start figuring out how to counter it. But how do you get a copy of something like that? I couldn't just call and ask. I needed to think, to plan, to find a way to level the playing field. Because if Olivia thought she was the only one with the ability to dig for information, she had another thing coming. I wasn't going to sit back and let her blindside me again. I wasn't going to let her tear my life apart without a fight. As the sun set and the room grew darker, I realized just how much had changed. The woman I'd loved, the life we'd built, the trust we'd shared, it all felt like a distant memory. Now it was just me, a desk covered in papers, and the knowledge that the battle had already begun. I didn't know who to trust, but I knew I couldn't do this alone. The weight of everything: Olivia's betrayal, the private investigator, The money I couldn't trace was crushing me. Every time I thought I had a handle on it, another piece of the puzzle would surface, showing me just how much I didn't know. I needed help. I needed someone who understood the kind of game Olivia was playing. Someone who could help me navigate the legal maze she was building. That's when I thought of Chris. Chris Evans wasn't just my friend, he was a lawyer. The kind of guy who knew how to handle situations like this. We'd known each other for years. And if there was anyone I could trust to have my back, it was him. I called Chris late that night. I wasn't sure if he'd answer, he had a family, and it wasn't like him to pick up after hours. But the phone only rang twice before he answered. His voice calm, steady. I could hear the faint sounds of his kids laughing in the background, a reminder of the life I used to think I had. The life that felt so far away now. I wasted no time. I told him everything, laid it all out. The sudden divorce announcement, the hidden accounts, the private investigator. I could hear his breathing change as he listened, the weight of my words sinking in. When I finished, there was a long pause on his end, and then he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Damn, Leo. That's heavy. But you did the right thing calling me. We need to get in front of this before it spirals out of control. Chris didn't sugarcoat things. He never did. He told me straight up that Olivia had the upper hand right now. That she'd been planning this for a while, and was already a few steps ahead. But he also said that we could catch up. That we could build a defense and make sure she couldn't take everything from me. His confidence gave me a glimmer of hope. Something I hadn't felt since this whole mess began. I agreed to meet him the next day at his office. To start going through all the paperwork. To figure out our strategy. For the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. The next morning, I walked into Chris's downtown office. A sleek, modern space that felt far removed from the chaos of my own life. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile, and showed me to a conference room. When Chris walked in, he had that same calm, collected demeanor he always had. But I could tell he was taking this seriously. He had a legal pad in one hand, a folder in the other, and a look on his face that said he was ready to fight. I felt a surge of relief just seeing him. This was someone I could rely on. Someone who knew how to handle the kind of storm Olivia had unleashed. We spent hours going through the documents I'd brought. Chris asked questions, taking careful notes, occasionally running a hand through his hair as he processed what I was saying. I told him everything about the transactions I'd found, the private investigator, the moments that now seemed like red flags in hindsight. He listened intently, only interrupting to clarify a detail or ask for more information. When we got to the payments Olivia had made, he leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the table. She's not just preparing for a divorce, he said finally. She's building a case. She's trying to find something to use against you. That was the moment it really sank in. This wasn't just about her leaving. This was about her making sure she could walk away with as much as possible. It made my blood boil. I'd given her everything, my trust, my support, my love, and now she was trying to take everything else. But Chris reminded me that we weren't out of options. If she's been moving money around, hiring people to dig into your life, that's going to leave a trail. We just have to follow it. I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. I couldn't change what Olivia had done, but I could take control of what happened next. Chris started outlining our plan. First, we'd separate my finances from hers as much as possible. If any of my assets were still tied to our joint accounts, we'd move them. Second, we'd start gathering our own evidence. If Olivia had hired a private investigator, we needed to find out what they'd found and what they hadn't. Third, we'd look into those mysterious payments. If she was funneling money into another account, we'd track it down. Chris's confidence was infectious. For the first time, I felt like I had a chance to fight back. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was taking the initiative. But even as we laid out our strategy, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Every time I thought about Olivia sitting across from that investigator, handing over our money so they could dig into my life, it made my stomach churn. How long had she been planning this? How long had she been pretending everything was fine, while she was setting the stage for my downfall? Chris must have seen the look on my face, because he paused and leaned forward, his tone softer. Leo, I know this is personal. It's hard not to let it get to you. But you have to stay focused. You're playing the long game here. If we keep our heads, We can come out of this on top. I nodded, even though the anger and hurt were still there. I knew he was right. I couldn't afford to let my emotions take over. I had to be smart, strategic. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about standing up for myself. About proving that I wasn't going to be a victim in my own life. When I left Chris's office, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, determination, and a small glimmer of hope. The fight was just beginning, but I wasn't alone anymore. I had Chris in my corner, and I had a plan. I wasn't just reacting to what Olivia threw at me. I was preparing for what came next. And I wasn't going to stop until I knew the truth. Until one understood exactly what she'd done and why. Because if she thought she could walk away from this unscathed, she was wrong. I wasn't going down without a fight. I left Chris's office feeling steadier than I had in days. For the first time since Olivia's bombshell, I wasn't drowning in questions. I had a direction. But I knew this wasn't going to be a quick or easy fight. Olivia hadn't just blindsided me. She'd built herself a fortress, brick by brick. And it was going to take more than one meeting to tear it down. The next step was to start putting our plan into motion, beginning with tracking down those missing funds. Chris had given me a starting point, but it was on me to follow through. The thought was both comforting and overwhelming. I had a plan, sure, but now I had to execute it. That night, I sat at my desk, the room lit only by the glow of my computer screen. The house was eerily quiet, almost too still, and for a moment I just sat there, staring at the papers I'd spread out in front of me. Bank statements, transaction records, old receipts, every scrap of information I could find that might tell me where the money had gone. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to focus. If Olivia had been moving funds, there had to be a trail. I just needed to find it. I started cross-referencing the dates and amounts from the statements Chris had flagged, looking for patterns. My mind was still racing from the meeting, my thoughts jumping from one piece of evidence to the next. But I forced myself to slow down and work methodically. As I combed through the documents, a few entries started to stand out. They weren't large amounts, at least not at first glance, but they were consistent small transfers to an account I didn't recognize. The more I looked, the more I realized that these small amounts added up over time. They were careful, deliberate, spread out enough that I never would have noticed them before. It wasn't until now, seeing them all laid out, that the pattern became clear. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. Olivia had been draining money from our accounts, a little at a time, probably hoping I'd never catch on. I pulled up my email and searched for anything from our bank, any correspondence that might confirm what I was seeing. That's when I found a notification I'd somehow missed, before a message about a new savings account, opened in her name alone. The date on the email matched the timing of the first transfer. My hands clenched into fists as I read it. She hadn't just been moving money, she'd been preparing her escape fund all along. The anger hit me hard. I pushed back from the desk, pacing the room. Every step echoed in the silence, the sound of my own footsteps grating on my nerves. I couldn't believe how far she'd gone. This wasn't just about a divorce or wanting a fresh start. This was calculated, deliberate theft. She'd been siphoning money from under my nose, using it to build her war chest while I was too busy working to notice. I thought about all those nights I'd stayed late at the office, putting in the hours so we could have a better life. All that effort, all that sacrifice, and she'd been using it against me. I sat back down, forcing myself to take deep breaths. Losing my temper wasn't going to help. I needed to stay calm, stay focused. Chris had been right, this was a long game. And I couldn't afford to let my emotions get in the way. If Olivia wanted to play dirty, I had to be smarter. I had to think 3 steps ahead. I spent hours going through every document, building my case. I wasn't just looking for the transfers. I was looking for proof that she'd been lying to me, manipulating me, preparing to leave long before she ever picked up the phone and said those words. I found more than I bargained for. Old credit card charges to places she'd never mentioned. Unexplained withdrawals that didn't line up with anything we'd discussed. It was all there, hidden in plain sight, and I'd been too trusting to see it. By the time I finally shut the computer down, my head was pounding and my eyes burned from staring at the screen. The clock on the wall read past midnight, but I didn't feel tired. I felt determined. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything we'd built together. If she wanted a fight, I'd give her one. I wasn't just doing this for the money. I was doing it to reclaim my life, my dignity. I'd spent too long letting her pull the strings. Now it was time to cut those strings for good. The day I confronted Olivia, the tension in the air felt like it could snap at any moment. I'd spent the previous night turning everything over in my head, playing out how it would go, what I'd say, what she might say back. But now that the moment was here, the words felt heavier than I'd expected, like they might sink me if I wasn't careful. I waited until she came home from work, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she walked through the door. She looked startled to see me standing there in the living room. Maybe she thought I'd be out, still running on the hamster wheel of work and stress like I usually was. But not tonight. Tonight was different. Olivia, I started, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. She stopped in her tracks, her expression tightening. We need to talk. Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Annoyance? Fear. She set her purse down on the console table by the door and crossed her arms. Talk about what? She asked, her tone cautious but guarded. She knew. I could see it in her face. She knew what was coming, and she was already trying to figure out how to control it. I held up the stack of papers I'd spent hours gathering, the bank statements, the mysterious transactions, the proof of her private investigator. About this, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. You've been hiding things from me. Moving money, hiring someone to dig into my life. Why, Olivia? Why would you do this? She blinked, just once. But it was enough to tell me she hadn't expected me to be so direct. Leo, she said slowly, her voice taking on that calm, measured tone she used when she wanted to deflect. I don't know what you think you've found, but I can explain. I let out a bitter laugh. Can you? Because it looks pretty clear to me. You've been planning this for months, maybe longer. The secret account, the investigator, the transfers. You've been building your escape plan behind my back, and you didn't think I'd find out? She stepped closer, her arms still crossed, her jaw tightening. You don't understand, she said, her voice lower now. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. I snapped. I could feel my pulse racing, my hands trembling as I held the papers. Tell me why you felt the need to go behind my back, to lie to me. After everything we've been through, after everything I've done for us, why would you do this? For a moment, she just stared at me. Her expression was unreadable, but I could see her mind working, trying to find the right words, the right angle. Then she sighed, dropping her arms to her sides. I did it because I needed to protect myself, she said quietly, looking away. I didn't know what else to do. Protect yourself from what? I demanded. From me? Olivia, I've never done anything to hurt you. I've never lied to you, never cheated on you. I trusted you. I thought we were in this together. And now you're telling me you needed to protect yourself from the one person who's always had your back? She shook her head, her eyes narrowing. You don't get it, Leo. You've changed. You've been so focused on work, so caught up in your own world, that I felt like I didn't have a choice. You stopped seeing me, stopped caring. I had to think about what was best for me. Her words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Had I been distant? Had I let work consume me to the point where she felt alone, neglected? But even if that were true, it didn't justify what she'd done. It didn't excuse the lies, the secrecy. So, what? I asked. My voice softer now. You decided to just leave? To steal money from our accounts, hire someone to dig up dirt on me, and walk away without even telling me what I did wrong? Her gaze met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw something like regret. But it was gone as quickly as it came. I needed to be sure, she said. I needed to know if you were hiding something from me. If there was another woman, another life I didn't know about. I laughed again, a hollow sound that felt foreign even to me. Another woman? Olivia, there's never been anyone else. I've been breaking my back trying to give us a good life, trying to make sure we had everything we needed. And while I was doing that, you were the one hiding things. You were the one making plans without me. She flinched at that, her face hardening. I'm sorry, she said, though her voice didn't carry much weight. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting myself from whatever this is. Whatever this is. I repeated, my voice rising again. This is our marriage, Olivia. Or it was. Until you decided to tear it apart piece by piece. And now you're trying to blame me for what you've done? Her expression shifted, and for the first time, I saw anger flash in her eyes. I'm not blaming you, she snapped. But I'm not going to apologize for looking out for myself. You stopped looking out for me a long time ago, Leo. You may not see it, but I do. I've felt it every day. And I won't just sit around waiting for the other shoe to drop. I stared at her, my chest heaving, my mind racing. This wasn't the Olivia I'd married. This wasn't the woman I'd spent years building a life with. She was a stranger now, someone I didn't recognize. And yet, part of me still wanted to believe there was a way to fix this, to undo the damage, to go back to the way things were. But as I looked at her, standing there with her arms crossed, her jaw set, her eyes full of defiance, I realized that the woman I'd known was gone. And maybe she'd been gone for a long time. I stood there, staring at her, trying to make sense of what she'd just said. She thought she was protecting herself? From what? From me? The anger I'd felt just moments ago started to shift into something darker, something heavier. I couldn't believe that after everything we'd been through, after all the nights I'd stayed late at the office to build our life together, she was standing there telling me that she'd been planning her exit. Worse than that, she had the audacity to act like I was the one who had changed, like I was the one who'd done something to push her away. I wanted to yell, to shake her, to make her understand what she was doing to me, to us, but I knew it wouldn't matter. She was already gone. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally? She'd checked out a long time ago. I was just the last to know. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Olivia stood there, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. I kept waiting for her to say something, to offer some kind of explanation. But it never came. Finally, I broke the silence. So what now? I asked, my voice low and rough. You've been hiding money, hiring people to dig into my life, and now you're telling me it's my fault you had to do it. What are you hoping to get out of this, Olivia? What's your endgame? Her gaze flickered, but she didn't look away. I don't know, she said, barely above a whisper. I just know I can't keep living like this. Living like what? That was what I wanted to ask her, but the words caught in my throat. I thought back to the early days, when we were just starting out, when we didn't have much but we had each other. Back then, it felt like we were a team, like nothing could come between us. I'd come home from a long day at work, and she'd be there waiting, a smile on her face, a warm meal on the table. We'd sit together, talk about our dreams, our plans for the future. Somewhere along the way, that started to change. The smiles grew fewer, the conversations shorter. I told myself it was just a rough patch, something all couples went through. But now, standing here in front of her, it was clear that the cracks had been there all along, and I'd been too blind to see them. I took a step closer, trying to keep my voice steady. You could have talked to me, I said. If you were unhappy, if you felt like something was missing, you could have told me. Instead, you decided to go behind my back, to lie to me, to treat me like the enemy. Do you have any idea how that feels, Olivia? To come home and find out that the person you thought you could trust more than anyone has been working against you? Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might say something, anything, to explain herself. But she didn't. She just stood there, staring at me, her eyes hard. It was like looking at a stranger. I didn't know this person. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd loved, was gone. And in her place was someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could stand there and justify tearing apart everything we'd built together without a hint of remorse. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. You know what? I said, my voice rising. Maybe you're right. Maybe I have changed. Maybe I've been so focused on work, on building something better for us, that I didn't see what was happening right in front of me. But that doesn't give you the right to lie to me, to steal from me. If you were unhappy, you should have told me. You owed me that much. She flinched at my words, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something like regret flash across her face. But it was gone just as quickly as it came. I'm sorry, she said, her voice flat. I didn't know how else to do this. You didn't know how else, I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. How about you sit me down and tell me how you're feeling? How about you give me a chance to fix things before you start siphoning money out of our accounts and hiring private investigators? But no. That would have been too hard, wouldn't it? It's easier to paint me as the villain, to make yourself the victim, so you can justify what you're doing. She took a step back, and I could see her defenses going up. You don't understand, she said, her voice shaking slightly. You don't see it. You think everything's fine because you're so caught up in your own world. But I've been alone in this marriage for a long time, Leo. I've been trying to figure out what to do, how to make things right for myself. And this was the only way I could see. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Alone in the marriage? Was that what she'd been feeling all this time? If that was true, why didn't she say something? Why didn't she give me a chance to fix it before it came to this? The anger inside me boiled over, and I couldn't hold it back anymore. You've been alone? I shot back, my voice rising. You think I haven't felt that too? You think I haven't noticed how you've pulled away? How you stopped talking to me? Stopped caring about what we had? I've been killing myself to make sure we had a good life. And while I was doing that, you were plotting your escape. Don't stand there and act like you're the only one who's been hurting. The room went silent, the tension so thick it was hard to breathe. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. Whatever fight she had left in her seemed to disappear, and she looked down, her arms wrapping around herself as if she were trying to shield herself from the weight of my words. I turned away, running a hand through my hair, trying to get a grip on my emotions. I couldn't believe this was happening, that the woman I'd built my life with had turned into this person. Someone I didn't even recognize. I didn't know what to do, what to say. All I knew was that the damage was done, and there was no going back. After everything that had come to light, after every lie, every betrayal, I knew the moment had finally arrived. The confrontation was inevitable. I'd spent too much time piecing together the puzzle, uncovering the depths of Olivia's deceit. The money transfers, the hidden accounts, the private investigator. Each discovery was like a brick in the wall she had built to keep me out. Now, that wall was crumbling, and I wasn't going to stand by and let her walk away unscathed. This wasn't just about protecting my assets anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity. About standing up for myself, and refusing to be a victim any longer. The day of the meeting, I woke up early. I couldn't sleep. My mind had been running non-stop, going over every detail, every possible scenario. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Olivia wasn't the kind of person to admit defeat. She'd fight tooth and nail to hold on to the story she'd crafted, to keep control of the narrative. But I had something she didn't: proof. Cold, hard evidence of everything she'd done. For the first time in months, I felt like I had the upper hand, and I was determined not to waste it. As I got ready that morning, I couldn't help but think back to the early days of our marriage. I remembered how we'd laugh until our sides hurt, how we'd make plans for the future with a kind of blind optimism that felt so natural then. We were supposed to be a team, partners. I thought about our first apartment, the way we'd eat dinner on the floor because we couldn't afford a dining table yet, and how we'd talk about all the things we were going to do once we made it. But now I couldn't even look at her without feeling a knot in my stomach. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone I couldn't recognize. And the worst part was knowing she'd been this way for a long time. I just hadn't seen it. When I finally walked into the conference room, she was already there, seated across the table, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Kenneth Griffin, her lawyer, was on her right, his expression carefully neutral. Chris sat next to me, his presence a steady reminder that I wasn't alone in this. He gave me a quick nod as I pulled out my chair and took a seat. My hands felt steady, even as my chest tightened with anticipation. This was it. The end game. The room was quiet for a moment, the only sound the faint hum of the overhead lights. Olivia avoided my gaze, her eyes fixed on the stack of documents in front of her. I could see the tension in her posture, the way her shoulders were set, like she was bracing herself for a fight. But I wasn't here to fight. I was here to end this. Kenneth cleared his throat. Mr. Ransom, he began, his tone polite but firm. We've reviewed the evidence you provided, and I must say, these are serious allegations. My client maintains that she acted in her own best interests, and, in her own best interests? I interrupted, my voice sharp. You mean by stealing from me? By lying to me? By hiring a private investigator to dig into my life? Let's not sugarcoat this, Kenneth. We both know what's been going on here. Olivia's eyes flicked up to meet mine, just for a moment. I could see the flash of anger, the flicker of defiance. But she quickly looked away. She wasn't going to admit anything. Not yet, Mr. Ransom, Kenneth said, his tone a bit more measured. It's not unusual for spouses to protect themselves in the event of a separation. While you may not agree with my client's actions, she was within her rights to. She was within her rights to take money from our accounts without telling me. I snapped. She was within her rights to hide assets. To build a war chest while I was completely in the dark? Spare me the legal spin, Kenneth. This isn't about rights, this is about betrayal. Chris placed a hand on my arm, a silent reminder to keep my emotions in check. I took a deep breath, letting the anger simmer just below the surface. Look, I said, my voice lower now. I'm not here to argue semantics. I'm here to settle this once and for all. I've got the records, the transactions, the private investigator's report. I know what's been going on, and I'm done pretending that this can just be brushed under the rug. Olivia finally spoke, her voice tight. Leo, I only did what I thought was necessary. You've been so focused on work, so distant. I had to protect myself. Protect yourself from what? I shot back. From me? From the person who worked day and night to build a life for us? You didn't protect yourself, Olivia. You sabotaged us. You destroyed the trust we had, and for what? A bigger slice of the pie? A chance to walk away with more than you deserve? Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might actually say something honest. But instead, she just sat there, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowing. I wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. I trusted you, I said, my voice steady. I believed we were in this together, but you were already planning your exit. You were already moving the pieces, lining everything up so that when you left, you'd leave me with nothing. That's not protecting yourself, Olivia. That's betrayal. Pure and simple. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Chris leaned forward, clearing his throat. I think it's clear that we're at an impasse here. The evidence speaks for itself. Mr. Ransom has provided ample proof of financial misconduct, and we're prepared to move forward with legal action if necessary. However, we believe it's in everyone's best interest to resolve this amicably. Olivia, if you're willing to come to an agreement, we can avoid dragging this into court. Olivia glanced at Kenneth, her expression unreadable. I could see the wheels turning in her head, the calculations she was making. She knew the evidence was damning. She knew that if this went to court, she'd lose. But admitting that, giving up her advantage, would go against everything she'd been fighting for. Kenneth finally spoke. We'll need some time to review this proposal. My client has concerns that, I'm sure she does, Chris said, cutting him off. But let's not waste any more time. You've seen the documents. You know the truth. Either we reach an agreement today, or we take this to court. And trust me, if we go that route, it's not going to end well for your client. The room fell silent again. Olivia's eyes were fixed on the table in front of her, her fingers gripping the edge tightly. She looked up at me then, and for the first time in months, I saw something I hadn't expected. Regret. It wasn't much, just a flicker, but it was there. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but then closed it again, shaking her head. I stood up, gathering my papers. Take all the time you need, I said, my voice cold. But know this, I'm done playing games. I'm done letting you manipulate me. Whatever happens next, you brought it on yourself. With that, I walked out of the room, Chris following close behind. As we stepped into the hallway, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't over yet, but I'd said my piece. I'd confronted her with the truth, and she couldn't run from it anymore. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was in control. And that was something she could never take away from me. Now you know how it all went down, how she thought she could outsmart me, and how it all fell apart. But here's the kicker, what would you have done in my place? Comment below. Did I handle it the right way, or would you have done something differently? I want to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and share this video, your support keeps stories like this coming. Life taught me a hard lesson: never ignore the small signs. In marriage, business, or any partnership, trust is earned and must be protected. If something feels off, don't wait. Investigate, ask questions, and take action before it's too late. I learned that self-reliance and careful planning are essential. Never assume others have your best interests at heart. Pay attention to your finances, demand transparency, and don't hesitate to stand up for yourself. This isn't about paranoia, it's about being prepared. In America, we value independence. Protect what's yours, and fight for your future.